All right, YouTube, you probably saw what John Lewis said the other day regarding Trump, that he didn't consider him to be a legitimate president, raising the specter again of this nonsense about Russia, saying, oh, Clinton lost because the Russians influenced the election and all that kind of crap, which never happened. It's mythology. It's being peddled by the DNC and similar groups to explain why they lost an election that they swore up and down for months, along with all their partners in the establishment legacy dying media. For months they said, oh, Clinton's a shoo-in, she's going to win, Trump has like a less than a 1% chance. Turned out that wasn't true. He won anyway because they fudged everything for months. So now they have to explain to people how they managed to lose what they cast as an unlosable election, as an election that for months before it actually, before the voting happened, they were certain to win, that supposedly their candidate widely won every debate, was always ahead of him in the polls. It looked like it was a foregone conclusion to them and what was going to happen in the election. Of course, it was a foregone conclusion nearly to me, only I happen to be one of the very, very small minority on the other side properly understanding the polls, understanding demographic shift, understanding paradigm shift. They lost. They can't get over it. They're boycotting the inauguration, a lot of them. For some of them, it's literally nothing more than sour grapes. They feel, oh, how did we lose? Obama was such a great person. I think John Lewis is one of them. He's going to use, much like Clinton herself tried to, the excuse of, oh, Russian hacking, Russian espionage, Putin loves Trump, blah, blah, blah. Trump is, controlled by Putin. I would like to say, if Trump actually was like hiring prostitutes to do golden shower stuff on the Obama's bed, and just he's massively controlled by Russia, why is it that there are other things in the news now? Wouldn't you think that the legacy media would fixate solely on that, not only before but also after the inauguration, to try to get him removed from office almost immediately, if that were actually the case? Oh, but then we find out, of course, none of this stuff came from the U.S. intelligence community. It came from someone who now has disappeared from off the face of the earth after handing it off to idiots like John McCain, who must be feeling pretty fucking dumb for taking it seriously. So yeah, that's a mythology. It is false. It is yellow journalism. It is not true. We can confirm that now. It's fairly obvious that it's not true. It was fairly obvious to begin with, though, to tell the truth. For John Lewis, I'll say this. His choice to boycott the inauguration, who cares? Yeah, you can go or you can not go. It's up to you. You're not under any onus as a person in Congress to go to the inauguration. I think people will think that it's sour grapes. They'll think you're a whiner that's seeking to use a bunch of elaborate mythology as an excuse for why you don't want to show up, because you don't want to see your own main man with the pork barrel politics, Obama, leave office and wish he could seek a third term. So it is a bit of sour grapes on his part and many others, but he's under no onus to do so. But for him to come out and proclaim that to his understanding Trump is not a legitimate president sounds rather funny, considering that these people, when Trump said during the election that it was possible that the election could be rigged, they swore up and down, every single one of them, John Lewis, Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, everybody else under the sun, Donna Brazile, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, that it was not only unconscionable that would happen, but impossible, that it was impossible to rig the voting machines. It was impossible for any foreign state to influence our elections. It was impossible for foreign money to influence it, certainly, when the specter of the Clinton Foundation and its Saudi and Qatari money was raised. They deflected and said, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't influence our politics at all. Tens of millions of dollars in the Saudis, drop in the bucket, so it's not going to cause us to do anything. Now, we know now, of course, pay for play was actually there in Clinton's State Department. She did take money as bribes. She did, provably so. So she is a shyster. She is corrupt. Many of these others working with her are corrupt. We know that happened. But they proclaimed that it couldn't happen. Now we know, of course, it did. Now they're saying that exactly what they said could not happen, which was that our election would not be completely and utterly transparent and fair with zero fraud. Now they're claiming it was rife with fraud. It was desperately unfair. The Electoral College is unfair and terrible and evil and corrupt. Russia's evil and terrible and corrupt. and influences our election indirectly or directly. Comey tried to influence the election. He was desperately corrupt, and all these different people now face the ire of the same groups that proclaimed for months before that literally this situation could not happen, simply because the person that they were stumping for lost, which is Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton, in truth, lost primarily because of a combination of her own mistakes and the fact that Obama's recovery never reached the Rust Belt. That's why Trump won the election. Stacking up a few extra million votes in deep blue parts of the country is meaningless. The concept of the national popular vote mattering in our elections is largely meaningless. Generally speaking, the popular vote and the electoral vote roughly line up. This time it happened not to. Not because Trump, was desperately unpopular in most states. He won most states. But because of the fact that Clinton's popularity only managed to peak, only her apparent strategy to go into some of these urban zones to pull out larger vote shares translated over really well into a huge advantage in California, which she was going to get anyway, in New York, which she was going to get anyway, in Illinois and maybe the Pacific Northwest that she was going to get anyway. It did not help her in swing states. That's why she lost. So for John Lewis to come out and call Trump illegitimate is retarded. It's retarded because to this day, despite all of these lurid tales we've been fed over and over, I still have not seen any significant evidence that the Russians influenced our election. If you're talking about, the promulgation of fake news stories by Russian-controlled or Russian-influenced segments of the media or the online community causing people to vote for Trump over Clinton, maybe a few people. Hopefully they have learned not to automatically trust the underground media at its word either. They should be fact-checking everything. They should be taking everything they hear with a grain of salt. But that's not an attempt to rig the election, any more than it would be if I, as a U.S. citizen, put out some fake story about Vladimir Putin during their election that decreased his support, and he loses narrowly. Does that mean that the United States, at the government level, attempted to influence the Russian election thereby? No, it means I, as an individual, decided I wanted to make some clickbait, because that's sort of how social media in many cases has begun to operate. Things are becoming more clickbaity over time. I resist that urge. There are plenty of others that resist that urge, but then there are some, I won't name names here, but there are some that increasingly are falling into that category. Groups that maybe a few years ago didn't, were more sensible. Again, I won't name names. I've seen it on Facebook with a few of these groups. I'm like, that's a bunch of bullshit. Some YouTube uploaders, some content creators here on YouTube that I myself subscribe to, I've thought about unsubscribing from because they start adding boom at the beginning of their titles on their videos, or they ramble on about something that they saw on Sputnik News, which arguably would be probably the best categorized as fake news, would be Sputnik at this point. If you want to worry about fake Russian material that perhaps is influencing a fringe audience in the West, it's Sputnik. It's not RT. RT has the typical spin you'd see on a CNN, but it's not the same category of material, certainly. But John Lewis has every right not to attend the inauguration. I'm not going to blame him for that. If he doesn't want to go, he doesn't want to go. Who cares? Trump perhaps turning around and saying, you should be focused more on helping your constituents. Of course, he's from Georgia. Yeah, that'd probably be a good idea. Georgia has some significant problems. Low educational attainment, widespread poverty, hell of a lot of crime, especially around Atlanta. Yeah, they could probably use his help. The thing is, a lot of these people in Congress, this is why Cruz is attempting to institute term limits. It won't, I think, work, but it's a good attempt anyway. Now, the first serious attempt we've seen in a while, at least. These people, they get into these positions, and they keep eking out the same niche voting block to get reelected over and over again. And they're just sort of there doing nothing until their pensions kick in when they decide to leave. And then they sit large and in charge. They're sitting pretty because they're still making more than the average person that voted for them will ever make. It's desperately stupid that that's the way things are done. There should be term limits. I'm not so sure we should even give Congress pensions. Seems like a waste of money to me, honestly. At the very least, we should give them, whatever the poverty line level of income is for an individual, that should be their pension. Maybe that times 150%, so that they can't complain that they're being misused. They get all these free fuel and free food and lodging and travel expenses stuff when they're in office. They don't need a six-figure income. It's not necessary. States should seriously take a look at paying their Congress people less. That way, hopefully, by the way, not sure why the Democrats would oppose this, because you'd think that then people who are less wealthy would be the ones seeking those positions with more fervor, and people who are more wealthy would shy away from them simply because they're not getting enough out of it to just if they're particularly in it for the money, as John Lewis and many others probably are. I'd say probably about more than half of all people in Congress, they're there because they get a fat paycheck for doing very little and a nice pension when they leave. That, and they get to wander around in their marble halls in D.C. for a while and pretend to take interest in what happens to the average person in this country. Yeah, that'd be a pretty good deal. Maybe get some of these idiots back out of office without even instituting term limits, because they won't be paid enough to bother being there, because they'd go back to the private industry that they came from. Usually they were a high-powered lawyer for some corporation, or they were, a business person who's worth tens of millions of dollars anyway, real estate development or oil extraction or whatever. Why would they then want to take a massive pay cut? Also, probably force them to divest in all their businesses. Trump's doing that. Trump's severing ties with the Trump organization, handing it off to his sons. The idea that he should sell everything, I would think that would actually be a bigger problem, by the way. I'll say this in closing. If he were to suddenly sell all of his foreign holdings, like I think there's a Trump hotel in Bangalore in India, certainly Trump properties all around Europe, wouldn't that be an opportunity in a bidding war for somebody to come along and offer him much more than it's worth in exchange for a bribe? Or something like that? I would think that'd be the wrong thing to do. I think it's more appropriate that he simply doesn't have control over his empire while he's in office, and gets a limited amount of information on what's going on there. This stuff about the blank sheets of paper on the forms that he had to sign, okay, well, it was a prop. Who cares? The point stands. It's probably better than ultimately selling everything. If he sold everything, those of you who are worried about him having a lot of money now would be really crying, because he'd probably make $5 or $6 billion off of all of those real estate sales. And if he chooses to run a second time around, he won't need the consent of the Republican Party to do so. He'll throw everything into even greater chaos. Just say, oh, well, I got $1 billion to spare. Come and try to match my fundraising apparatus. You're not going to make it work. It'd be great to watch somebody like Jeb Bush running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to raise money after being a total loser. I look at the Democrats, and one of the reasons why I predict that they're probably going to try another Obama dark horse candidate style thing is because when I look at the party, other than maybe Joe Biden, I don't see anybody who really would qualify and have significant recognition to run. The idea of Michelle Obama, I don't think that'll happen. I don't think, honestly, she'd even be interested in the job. This would be a person who, again, doesn't have any political experience, would oddly enough be equivalent to Trump on that token. Somebody who has less experience than Clinton had, much of which was poor experience, has been a first lady and nothing else. You'd probably be more likely to see one of Obama's daughters enter politics in the future than Michelle Obama doing so. Chelsea Clinton, of course, is barely getting into the possibility of the political game. Obama can't run again. Some of the runner-ups, like Bernie Sanders, he might not even be above the ground by the time the next election runs around. He might be demented by then, too. He's always been economically demented, but you know what I mean. So, yeah. When John Lewis proclaims illegitimacy in the presidency, it's actually very funny to see some D.C. insider, someone within the DNC, proclaim that the U.S. government could be compromised because they spent years claiming that that could never happen. When the teabaggers were rambling about Obama being compromised by the Saudis or something, said, oh no, it could never happen, it could never be true, well, where's your evidence? Now all of a sudden they don't ask for any evidence, they just take some random report by an intelligence agency at face value, just like they did before they voted to go to war in Iraq. It's funny to see them spite their own arguments that they made in the past. I think John Lewis has been in there long enough to remember those issues, but he doesn't care because he gets his pension either way. He doesn't have to make sense. He's in Congress. Congress doesn't have to make sense. They typically don't. That's why they typically enjoy an approval rating about half that of what Trump's at, which is arguably a mediocre at best number at the moment, too. The media as well is right down there. It's funny when people say, oh, Trump has 38% approval, the lowest of anyone who will enter the presidency. Yes, he does. The media has 32% approval, and Congress has about an 18% to 22% approval rating. So I'm not so sure that that's an adequate measure, really, of what people really truly care about, because if they're comparing Trump to generically Congress in general, they probably approve of Trump more. If they're comparing him to the media, they probably trust him a little bit more than they do the media. Perhaps a dangerous precedent in some people's minds, but also an amusing precedent as well, to see how far some of these power sources really have fallen. So people who normally would be able to broadcast what John Lewis is saying and be taken seriously, it's not clear that much of their audience really cares anymore. Which could be a big problem, honestly, especially for Congress. If they try to get in Trump's way, he'll use the bully pulpit, specifically through Twitter and things like that. He doesn't need the media. He's probably going to try to keep the mainstream media as far away from him as possible to give them as little leverage as possible so that other people can break stories first. He can get his word in edgewise before CNN and groups like that even respond. Cut off the head of the snake. They can't spin things into oblivion as easily if the first story is, less biased or even a pro-Trump bias, I suppose you could say. Of course, if Trump is tweeting, he's going to have a pro-Trump bias because he is Trump. John Lewis and similar politicians are at a little bit of a loss how to cope with this because so many people are getting what Trump says directly from Trump on social media without an intermediary other than the fact that he happens to be using Twitter or a YouTube message or something, that it gives the mainstream media no ability to break the story. It only gives them the ability to analyze it, which is a power that they share with millions of other people using social media. So they're hobbled. It's great. It's good. Probably should have been done long ago. It'll hasten their demise. Good. All of these legacy media outlets should go out of business. They should not exist. There's no longer a need for corporate media in the Western world. We have social media. People can analyze things for themselves. What we need is raw reporting, raw journalism. We don't need some corporate apparatus like Fox or CNN to then analyze that news and spit it out to people in opinionated form. If you want that, you can go online and get the same thing, and you don't have to pay to see what's on TV. You don't need it. It's not necessary. It's less entertaining. It's much more inefficient and expensive. It's pointless. That's about all. Peace out.